Hey guys, this is Mike Mahaffey, the old bastard BJJ guy, here for BJJ Mental Models. Back in my day, we had to walk uphill in the snow both ways to get to the academy just to learn some crappy technique from a random purple belt. You kids have it so easy because now you can just subscribe to BJJ Mental Models Premium and get tons of great audio courses to learn new techniques, enhance your mindset, and entertain yourself. You can even get personalized rolling reviews from some of your favorite BJJ Mental Models coaches, including me. It's like having your own seminar, you spoiled little whippersnappers. So what are you waiting for? Subscribe to BJJ Mental Models Premium right now, get off my lawn, and go train.
Welcome to BJJ Mental Models, episode 266. I'm Steve Kwan. BJJ Mental Models is your guide to a conceptual and intelligent jiu-jitsu approach. And today I am pleased to be joined by Mr. Alec Baulding. How's it going, Alec?
It's going well. Happy to be on. I know we were supposed to connect a while ago. Now's the perfect time.
Now's the perfect time. That happens quite a bit. Everyone is so busy in jiu-jitsu and with people traveling all over the place and doing seminars. Sometimes it can be hard to make things happen, but I am glad to have you here. Why don't you go ahead and tell people, if they're not familiar with who you are, give yourself a quick intro and just let them know what you're all about.
Hey guys, my name is Alec Baulding, jiu-jitsu competitor, I guess. I still compete a little bit, but I've mostly been focusing on YouTube. So if you guys have watched anything, it's probably been off of YouTube. ADCC competitor, almost European champion. I think that's about all I got.
Well, hey, on the YouTube front, you recently did a video about us, actually, about our relationship with Jozef Chen and his rise to greatness. Man, I really appreciate the shout out. I can't tell you enough how much it meant to me that you kind of gave us a shout out there and gave us some props. Jozef has become a good friend over the years. The first time I got introduced to him was way back when I think he was an orange belt or something. I got a fan letter from him just saying how much he liked the podcast, and now he is one of the best competitors in the world. He has been on our podcast. We actually just recorded an episode with him on our premium service, and I'll probably talk more about that later. And also, to complete the cycle, he is now one of BJJ Mental Models' sponsored athletes, which is super cool. So it's interesting how quickly that guy has moved forward, man. But yeah, I will put a link in the show notes. If people haven't seen Alec's YouTube video about Jozef Chen's rise and the way that he has learned jiu-jitsu so fast, I definitely recommend it. And not just because I'm in it. It's actually an amazing video. So, man, thanks so much for making that video. I always appreciate that kind of attention.
No, man, it was a good, especially the first copy. The first edition was really good. That got taken down. So I tried my best to replicate the same quality, but, without the copyrighted material, obviously. So I think it's a good video for especially newer people. I talk to so many new people, so they're always asking how to get better or why they're not improving so fast. So I think that's a great resource for those guys.
Yeah, this is something I've been critical about for a long time in the jiu-jitsu culture. This perception that jiu-jitsu is unusually hard or complicated, and you need to spend over a decade to get your black belt. I mean, I guess that to some extent it's a unique and challenging sport, but I don't think it's that different from a lot of the other walks of life. I can't imagine going to a university and having them brag about how hard their bachelor's program is and how at other schools you go there and you'll get your degree in 4 years, but we're special, so it's going to take you 10 years to get it here. It just seems like there's a focus on making things harder than they need to be rather than making things efficient. And you see all of these people coming up now who have hit their black belts in just a few years, and they are light years better than the people of my generation. And it makes you realize that things have evolved a lot and people are thinking much more intelligently about their training. And I've got the feeling that's probably going to come up in our conversation today because the topic that you had proposed was the journey from student to teacher. Yeah, something that I think everyone in jiu-jitsu is going to go through if they stay in it for long enough, frankly, whether they want to or not. And we'll get into that in a bit. But why don't you introduce the topic here? Tell me why you selected this and how this kind of blends with your personal story.
I have a few friends that are going through this process, that maybe they're around purple or brown belt, and now they're starting to teach, going from a student to teaching. So, if you haven't taught before, tutored anybody or anything like that, it can be a big jump. You're going from being in the class to like having to kind of oversee and manage the class. So there's a lot of skills that, not just jiu-jitsu knowledge, you need a lot of other skills to just make it through the class. So I thought it was very interesting. It's something that maybe one of my friends will hear, or I can just send them the link to the video instead of me like talking to them for 1 hour. I can help other people as well. So that's why I picked this topic.
And I can tell you from my experience, like I said, if you stick around in the sport long enough, you will eventually have to wear the teacher's hat. And that doesn't mean that you are an employed jiu-jitsu instructor. It doesn't mean you're a gym owner. But eventually, at some point in time, the more junior people are going to be asking you questions. And the more you answer those questions, the more you're going to realize that this process of being the teacher actually helps improve your knowledge to some extent. And there's a level of enjoyment and fulfillment that you get out of that, especially as you get older and more experienced, that you aren't going to get when you focus exclusively on your own journey. I know a lot of people who say they have no ambitions of being a jiu-jitsu instructor or a gym owner. I am one of those. I never wanted to be a jiu-jitsu career guy, but even if that's not your intent, it's inevitable that we're all going to wind up wearing the teacher's hat to some degree. And the sooner you kind of tap into that, the sooner you realize that there's actually a kind of a feedback loop between being a student and a teacher. I've always found that being a teacher helps because it allows me to clarify my ideas. It's one thing for me to be able to do something on the mats. It's another thing for me to be able to explain and distill that information clearly enough that other people can understand it, and then to give them tools so that they can build up and learn that skill as well. A lot harder than I think most people think. Most people come into this thinking it's as simple as just banging out a few techniques and telling people to copy you. But I think that's where you get into this argument about, why does it take people 10 plus years to get a black belt in the sport? Well, because we're not necessarily using the most efficient methods for learning.
I mean, also, when I look back, a lot of people were held back certain belts. So even if they were technically proficient, maybe they were immature or the instructor wasn't ready. I'm not saying everybody wasn't technical back in the day, but a lot of times, like, you just had to wait. You just had to go through the process of winning tournaments and competing, and there was just no way to rush that.
Yeah, and worth pointing out too that time spent at a rank is not always representative of skill. One of the main reasons I've heard why it takes people long to hop up belts is because of some bullshit gym drama. There's a lot of people who were ready to get their black belt and it was going to happen any day, and then their instructor did something stupid and they wound up leaving the gym and they had to kind of start fresh from a new instructor who's obviously not going to give you your black belt on month one, even if you deserve it. They're going to want to feel you out and make sure that you're aligned with their standards and philosophy as well. So it's important to understand too that, there's a lot more that goes into how good someone is at jiu-jitsu versus just how long they've been training sometimes or what belt they have around their waist. It's just an interesting thing about jiu-jitsu that I've noticed. That's an increasingly common excuse I hear for why people haven't been promoted is because they had a falling out with their instructor.
That happens.
Absolutely does. Well, tell me a little bit about this journey then. I mean, you've gone through this yourself and you've talked about friends who have gone through this as well. What kind of kicks off that journey when someone decides, I want to go up to the next level? I don't just want to be here practicing. I want to be the person who's teaching as well. Or even if I'm not the one at the head of the class, maybe I'm involved in helping people on the mats in some other way. How does that journey begin from what you've seen and what you've experienced firsthand?
Well, there's different paths. Oftentimes, like you said, it's like the coach needs someone to cover the class, or, everyone's going to some tournament or on vacation. So, we need the next highest guy to cover the class. That happens a lot. Very rarely, I think, do you see people that just really want to teach. There's a few people like that. They just can't wait to help out. They're going to help with the new people's onboarding those guys. In my case, I started teaching kids. And then my friend that got me into it just asked me, hey, you're good with kids, aren't you? And I was like, yeah. And that's kind of how I got into it. But I think most people don't seek it. That's what I've seen. Most of my friends, I think very similarly, they were just maybe pretty good. They were needed to cover the class. And then that's kind of usually how it starts. And I will say for myself, I started pretty young. A lot of like me learning to teach was like more of an apprenticeship. So I was teaching under another instructor, someone more senior, and kind of learning the ropes that way. I think that's the best way. It's not always possible, but if you had to learn some way, I think that's probably the better way to do it.
Yeah, it's nice to have someone that you can emulate because it is an intimidating experience being at the head of the class. And if you have someone that you can kind of look to for inspiration, that can help a ton. That said, though, I would say one of the challenges that a lot of jiu-jitsu instructors have is a lot of what they teach is they just copy the person who taught them. And when that happens for a few generations, you wind up seeing things get very traditional. If every instructor is just duplicating what their own instructor did, that can result in some closed-mindedness. And then when a new idea comes in and disrupts the jiu-jitsu landscape, you might be not particularly equipped for that if all of your instruction just comes from some old school person that you learned off of as well. How do you go about supplementing as a coach when you're not just getting instruction from the person who is your lineal promoter and instructor? How do you go about getting information from other places and integrating that into that game plan?
It's kind of cool because I've seen, I've been around jiu-jitsu for a while, so I've kind of seen how that's changed. The older generation was more, like you said, traditional. You got to copy it the way the Gracies did. I've seen kind of how YouTube has kind of shifted that, YouTube, BJJ Fanatics, Jiu-Jitsu X, Digitsu, On the Mat. So now there's so many resources, you have access to so many instructors, Danaher, Craig Jones, even Jozef, people like Jozef, new people coming up. So there's no shortage of things to kind of, I don't want to say copy. There's definitely no shortage of people to copy. But I think that's keeping jiu-jitsu fresh because you can't avoid the new techniques, the new moves that are coming out. Like it's just impossible unless you're at one of the more traditional schools where all they do is self-defense. I think everybody's being exposed to, flow grappling, the new moves that the Mendez brothers put out, the new moves that the B team guys do. From what I've seen, almost everybody, I don't want to say they know all the same moves, but they're being exposed to all the new techniques kind of real time. So I don't think there's an issue with staying up to date that way. It can be kind of hard to figure out what to show, though, for newer instructors, because maybe they want to show something new, but maybe they aren't good at that just yet. So something I've been thinking of is the difference between, I guess, is emulating and copying, and what's the last one? Aping. I was reading something on that very, very recently. So to emulate, it's kind of to put your spin on the techniques itself. So you could see something that Gordon does, maybe some type of pass or something, or Danaher does. But I'm sure that everyone can add their own experiences, their own little tweaks that only they can do. That's usually what I suggest instructors do. You can copy a little bit, but if you can emulate the moves, maybe from your own instructor or, whoever you guys are watching, and just add your little spin, I think that's the right way to go.
Yeah, the journey to teaching mastery is kind of similar to the journey of jiu-jitsu mastery itself. When you're a white belt at teaching, you are probably best suited copying what the people that inspire you are doing and learning from them. Because when you're just getting started, you might not have the knowledge or the context to really be able to come up with your own solutions. But once you get comfortable with it and you have some best practices in place, the next challenge is understanding that you don't want to just copy your instructor. You want to go beyond that, and you want to add your own touches to things. Just because something worked for your instructor doesn't mean it will necessarily work for you. And just because your instructor did something one way doesn't mean that was actually a good way. There's a lot of things that I've seen instructors do over the years that I didn't really question at the time. But in retrospect, it really just was not a way that I would teach people now, knowing what I know. There's a lot of things that instructors tend to do where they will kind of, maybe they won't be very informed about the best practices for how to actually teach someone. That's kind of one of the tricks in jiu-jitsu is most of us are not formally trained teachers. And so we don't really know what we're doing when it comes to teaching. I mean, if you go and talk to a public school teacher, the amount of education that they have to get in order to be qualified to teach at a public school is massive. Most jiu-jitsu instructors don't get that. As soon as they get to, purple, brown, black belt, they just get thrown at the front of the class one day and they got to figure it out. And they might have the jiu-jitsu skills to do that, but do they have the communication skills? Can they build rapport? Can they diffuse difficult situations? Do they know how to structure a lesson so that they can deliver it to people in a way that it will be received well? And that doesn't even get into movement science and things like ecological dynamics, which are kind of exploding and becoming more popular. And so I think the main challenge from that journey from student to teacher is that up until that point, all of your preparation has been as a student. And then suddenly when you become a teacher, there's now all of these new skills that you are expected to know, which you never had experience at before. And there isn't that much information out there for jiu-jitsu coaches on how to be a better coach. It's mostly around how to do techniques, but not how to teach techniques or how to be a better instructor.
I think for me, I've definitely watched a lot of instructors. I had I've been very fortunate to have really great instructors. And so I could kind of pick up on, oh, you can do it like this. Oh, definitely don't do what they just did right there. So like that really helped me so much, seeing like, oh, that works really well. Oh man, people are really, they're responding really well to how he said that or how he demonstrated that move. It's almost like becoming a comedian or an actor. That's like, there's so many skills that you had to develop. And I'm going to be honest, you got to bomb. You're going to have a lot of bad classes. You're going to piss off a few people. Some students are going to be upset. They're not going to want to attend your classes. Some people are going to be bored. They're going to be like, oh, where's the other instructor coming back? It's like you kind of have to go through that. You're going to have to go through drama and go through, like I said, bad classes until you become decent.
Yeah. And my experience on that front has just been to be open with your students. People in jiu-jitsu tend to, they really hate to admit the limitations of their knowledge, and they hate to kind of look bad. This is enough of a problem when you talk about the way that people roll. It's hard to put their egos aside.
Oh, man, yeah.
Yeah, but it very much comes up as well when you're a teacher. And it's a little bit dicier, too, when you're at the front of the class and you're trying to give instruction if you're not really equipped to do it. My answer there has always been to just be open and honest with your students. If you're just getting started as an instructor, tell your students that. Tell them, look, I'm getting started here. I'm learning how to do this. I'm not the expert in teaching. I want your feedback to the people in the room. How can I be a better teacher? If you just come in and try to act like the font of knowledge who has all of these answers, you're kind of just discouraging that type of feedback. And I mean, the problem is when you're the teacher, look, you're going to get feedback in one of two ways. You're either going to get it directly from your students, or you're going to get it on a very public Yelp review, right? And you probably want to get it from your students rather than having it on a Yelp review.
I always suggest people start with the kids class. That's not what people want to hear. It's maybe even tougher than teaching the adult classes, but you can make a lot more mistakes in the kids classes. The kids class, they're going to have a little bit more patience with you. Versus the adults, especially, busy adults, they're not going to have that much patience with you. So if you guys want to start teaching, I say start with those kids. And usually your instructor needs the most help with those kids classes anyway.
And it's also good to point out that if you're just open with the limitations of your knowledge, that's always going to be well received. I mean, if you're not an expert in something, just tell people, right? Work it out together. The relationship between the instructor and the student is not one way. A lot of the time, the students are going to be able to help you just as much as you can help them. And the goal, I think, is not to create a one-way flow of knowledge, but rather to turn the mats into a lab where everyone is collaborating and working together and learning. I've always learned a ton from students. I think, in fact, one of the biggest mistakes we make in jiu-jitsu is often thinking that, white and blue belts just aren't qualified to teach anything. The problem with that kind of mentality is it encourages people to delay getting teaching experience until they're a brown or a black belt. But really, I think for most people, they'd be better off getting some experience trying to teach at a more junior level. Now, people will argue, well, if you're a white belt or a blue belt, you shouldn't be teaching because you don't know what you're doing. Well, that depends on what you mean by teaching. If that white belt is sitting there telling everyone exactly what to do and where to put their left foot and the right arm, yeah, I would agree that's probably not a great use of anyone's time. But if that white belt is leading a collaborative discussion about how to solve problems and kind of creating that experimental culture, turning the gym into a lab, and maybe even spearheading the process of trying to find people who do have the answers, right? If we don't have the answers, we can go and we can ask and come back tomorrow and try again. Creating that culture is something anyone can do, regardless of belt rank.
I mean, even doing jiu-jitsu, say you're working with a newer student, so it could be like a more senior white belt or blue belt. I mean, technically they're, teaching. So I think you don't have to teach in a formal setting, just, helping someone remember a technique, or I don't want to say correct someone else, but just working with newer people is another form of teaching. So you don't really need to wait. I definitely wouldn't wait till I was a black belt to start teaching. I think I was maybe a blue belt when I started working with kids. But yeah, I mean, people watching or listening to this podcast could start teaching, tomorrow. Just go to class and help a newer person. You see someone struggling, that could be your foot in the door, so to say.
Absolutely. And the real takeaway there is to understand teaching doesn't necessarily mean you have the answer. Teaching can mean that you're facilitating a journey to find the answer together. So even if you are a white belt and you don't know what you're doing at all, you can commit to working with the people around you to figuring out a solution. And that can involve asking the people who do know. It can involve experimenting and playing around and trying to sort out the solution on your own. I think everyone kind of intuitively does this. You know, when I started as a white belt, I had a group of white belt friends, and we would all kind of just goof around and try to find answers to things. And if we couldn't find them, we couldn't really look on the internet at the time because there wasn't that much info out there, but we would look to maybe one of the senior people in the class and we would ask them about it. So I think, again, sometimes in jiu-jitsu, people try to shut down the more junior belts teaching. And I think that's a mistake because eventually those junior belts are going to hit like brown or black belt if they stay around. And at that point, don't you want them to have more teaching experience, right? I would say that's better than having more or than having less.
Yeah, I mean, I want to say it's delegating, but it's definitely going to just have a better culture when people are more willing to help, more able to help.
Now, in terms of content and study, this is something you talked about earlier and how there's so much instructional material out there, so there's no shortage of answers. If I want to have a problem solved in jiu-jitsu, the answer is out there somewhere. It's just a matter of finding it. And that, I think, is where the problem is these days. There's so much material out there. I don't think a person with a reasonable amount of time to invest in jiu-jitsu is going to be able to go through it all. Even the pros can't watch everything that's out there. And we sometimes expect casual grapplers to spend as much time studying as the coaches would. I don't think that's realistic. I don't think it's fair to tell, your part-time grapplers who are doing this for fun that they need to watch 3 hours of instructionals every night, right? A lot of people are on a budget, both from a time and a cost perspective. And so the challenge I often find is I just get overwhelmed by the amount of content, so much so that I don't even really know where to start. I don't even know where to begin. And I've got to imagine that if you are in that position now where you are trying to put on your teacher hat and figure out what am I going to teach my students, I mean, how do you recommend people find those resources that they then bring into their classes out of the thousands of things they can buy on Fanatics? How do they find the best one for their class?
There's a lot of different factors. You know, you're teaching a beginner's class, you probably want to stick with more of the fundamentals, maybe self-defense, very basic moves. I think especially when I'm dealing with more advanced classes, that's when I start, more discussions, more freedom in the topic. It can be it's a little bit more daunting to teach the more advanced people. Usually I'm just trying to bring their attention to whatever is newer, whatever I'm seeing in tournaments, what I'm seeing the high level athletes are doing, what I think they should be watching out for. That's typically where I'll guide the class towards. And, really when you're teaching more advanced students, you're not really teaching them anything new. It's usually going to be one or two little details like adjustments. That's usually how we're teaching the more advanced people. It's more about adjustments and just fine tuning more so than just how to, do basic movement and then typically, when I'm teaching, I'm pretty selfish. I'll teach what I'm working on, something I kind of learned from John Thomas because he's always, working something new. And then in that regard, it's like, okay, this is a new position. This is a new way of looking at the move. And so, I mean, usually that's already tough as it is. I don't know if I answered the question or not.
Well, there's kind of a few pieces to unpack here. One is in terms of, teaching fundamentals versus teaching the advanced classes. There's a lot that we could discuss there. I don't even know if there's widespread agreement about what the fundamentals are. So when you say you teach the fundamentals, what would you say are the fundamentals in jiu-jitsu? And I ask this because my thinking on this has changed quite a bit over the last few years. So for you, what would you say the fundamentals are?
The fundamentals, I think kind of similarly to judo, how to break fall, how to just basic movement skills, shrimping, rolling, the skills to keep you safe and uninjured. That's what I'm thinking of. And then basic defenses, how to defend armbar, how to get out of the choke, how to defend your back. Those are all things, well, they can also be more advanced, but those are the things I consider more basic. It's usually the stuff that no one wants to work on as they progress. So we try to kind of push it towards the beginning more so. But also, it depends on your gym. Some schools, the basics might be how to berimbolo or how to play spider guard. So that's very gym dependent. You're going to have your old school people that follow the Gracies, and then you have the newer school people that are doing, whatever the B team is doing or whatever Danaher and New Wave is doing. So that can be tough.
Yeah. There is very much a culture thing there, and that's going to be informed by the mentality of your coach and what his or her priorities are. I am inclined to agree with you that at a fundamental level, the first thing I would want new people to learn is to give them the tools that will keep them safe. So for me, that would mean things like just basic body control. You know, you brought up some great example about things like shrimping and such, but I would go even beyond that and just coaching people about when to relax, when to be tense, how to manage their breathing, how to know if their arm, leg, or neck is getting put in a situation where there is risk to themselves. I would say for me, my first and foremost consideration with a new student, even before really having them understand what jiu-jitsu is, would be giving them the tools so that no matter what happens, they're not going to get injured. Because I think that, you know, the killer of white belts is injury. You want to make sure, especially at the early stages, that you are as consistent as possible. When you're a black belt, it's not that big a deal if your consistency falls off the track because you've already integrated this so much into your life that it's a lot easier to come back. I mean, I have taken 2.5 year long layoffs in jiu-jitsu and still come back, right? When you look at things over a long enough time window, that doesn't actually turn out to be that long in the grand scheme of things. But if you've only been training for 2 months, man, you get sidelined by an injury and you're going to be out for a month, and that might completely kill your joy for the sport. You may simply never come back because you haven't established jiu-jitsu as a lifelong habit yet.
And I will say it takes a while to develop those skills to protect yourself. I think I see a lot of white belts, especially new people, you know, they're very gung-ho about training. So they start training 3, 4, 5 times a week when, you know, you have to allow your body time to adapt to the sport, and just learning those proper movement skills is so important.
Yeah, it's interesting. Sanjay Ribeiro was recently up here in Vancouver doing a seminar, and he did it very differently from any seminar that I can recall going to in the past. I've said before that I feel that most seminars are really not actually that valuable when it comes to getting better at jiu-jitsu. Mostly they are an opportunity to handshake with your heroes and get their signature and their autograph, right? That's what you're going to get out of it. Usually when you go to a seminar, the person's priority is to kind of give you a window into what they've been working on, or maybe give you some flashy stuff that they think is going to be memorable, but it usually doesn't translate to much that's meaningful. Because part of the problem is if this isn't your regular instructor, and they just come in and show you some stuff that they've been playing with, well, that doesn't integrate into your existing training, and it can be hard to kind of find a way to fit it in. And there isn't even any evidence a lot of the time that stuff might work, right? If someone's teaching you stuff that's still kind of in the lab, it might not really be proven under pressure. To get back to my original point, Sanjay Ribeiro, when we were training with him, he spent the majority of the seminar just practicing very specific movement practices. So kind of teaching your body to move in a certain way. It was almost kind of more like a flow yoga class than it was jiu-jitsu. But then when he started tying those movements into some technical concepts later, I was really amazed at how well everything chained together. The movements felt a lot more comfortable. The techniques felt a lot more comfortable because we'd already been isolating and practicing the fundamental movements. So I think that kind of focusing on good movement as a base is a good way to help white belts, especially because you got to keep those injuries low.
I think that's something that AOJ does a good job of. I know they do a lot of movement skills in their classes. And that's a good way, like you said, to kind of, I mean, it's a good way to get the body moving, but also to prepare it for the movements later on. Yeah, man, I wish more schools would incorporate that. But also, what I'm seeing now is a lot of schools, like the time in classes, we've almost become too efficient, if that makes any sense. Like a lot of the classes are 1 hour, so we have to cut out so much useful stuff, really, and just in the hopes of getting you in and out and, about your day.
Yeah, 1 hour is not a long time to train. I've been at schools that train for hour classes, 90 minutes, 2 hours. For me, at least, I found the sweet spot for a class is 90 minutes. It's really hard to get a lot done in an hour just because in that time constraint, to be able to give people some sort of meaningful way to get warm and get moving, to fit in any explanation you want, to explain the parameters of the techniques you want people to practice or the games or drills you want them to follow, and then to give them some realistic sparring. I mean, it's very hard to fit all of that into an hour. Now, that said, it can be done, and especially if you're very laser focused on what you're teaching, but I've sort of felt like the sweet spot is 90 minutes.
Yeah, that's good. I'm from the old school of like 2 to 3 hour classes where you're like, oh my God, please.
That can be a little bit difficult though, because for a lot of people that just won't fit into their schedule. What we do at our gym is we actually break the class into halves. So it's actually a 2-hour block, but technically it's 2 different classes sandwiched together. And that way people can come for the first one. And if their schedule just doesn't allow them to hang around for the second one, they can leave without feeling guilty about it. And then anyone who wants to hang around can. And that's kind of the best of both worlds, because then you're either going to get the short class, which is still better than no jiu-jitsu, or if you can afford the time and you're interested in hanging out longer, you can stay for the second class as well.
But one thing I want to bring up is, as an instructor, it's important that you're observant. You need to learn how to observe the class, the flow of the class. When people are rolling, that's when you need to be the most observant, especially newer students. Keep them from, I don't want to say keep them from rolling hard, but, just have a eye on them in case something's about to happen. Because, was it this year, where there was a big case. It actually happened in 2018, I believe, but there was a big case where one person was injured, seriously injured. Actually, there's been multiple cases of people getting seriously injured. I just wonder if someone was watching the class, if, maybe those things wouldn't have occurred. So as an instructor, you have to be observant. If you feel like, okay, the white belts are about to kill each other, it's okay to kind of maybe bring that to their attention. Like, hey guys, calm down, go back onto the mat. And then also coaching, that's also coaching people while they're rolling. That's also a skill that's important to develop. Knowing when to give feedback and how to give that feedback. There's so many skills. Like you said, there's not really a resource. I probably won't make that resource, but maybe somebody will make that resource, like an instructor's course or something. But there's so many skills to develop. I just don't know how to shortcut it for you guys.
I don't think there is a way. I think that's why it's so important to start getting your teaching experience sooner rather than later. On the topic of white belts killing each other, I mean, that a big part of that is a culture thing, and that's going to be set by the coach. I think a mistake a lot of teachers make is they're too hands off on trying to aggressively control the culture. But really what you do at the front of the room is going to dictate the way that the people in your class behave. If you set the culture that this is a fight club, those white belts are going to try to kill each other. This is where something like gamification is so handy. And you hear a lot of the coaches using more modern or more innovative methods talk about this stuff. If they're talking about things like ecological dynamics or whatever, gamification is great for this, because if you take the fight out of jiu-jitsu and you turn it into a game, then you change the mindset around it. It's no longer about defeating the other person. It's about play. And if you can make that mental shift in your students, it makes people less likely to go aggressive. And what you're really trying to do is you're trying to prevent them from being in constant fight or flight mode where they're there to win or die. That's not the mentality you want your white belts to have. It's very hard to learn if every roll or every session is a fight. So that is one of the cool tools that coaches can deploy, is if you can change that culture and convince people that this is a game, not a match, it's going to make it a lot easier to get them to focus on skill development instead of on victory. So that's an important thing that coaches can consider doing. But yeah, you're right that so much of this comes down to how the coach structures the class, and yes, keeping an eye on the students as well. Now, I think sometimes many coaches are too eager to just let their students do what they want. And if injuries happen, they happen. I mean, that's not smart for a variety of reasons. It's bad from a business standpoint. It's bad from a learning standpoint. It's also bad from a am I helping people improve their lives standpoint. If your white belts are coming in and they're getting their ACLs torn off in a month, you're not really giving them the full benefit of jiu-jitsu, because the main thing that keeps people in this sport for the long term is the quality of life improvements. And if everyone is always on the injured roster, even before they get their first stripe, can you really say as a coach that you've done your best? I would say probably not.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, either way, you got to stay observant. Something else I would like to emphasize is, when you're coaching, please have good time management skills. That's something I see. I'm actually really conscious about that. I see some coaches run over or they start late. They don't have their pulse on the class. Like, how's the class doing? Oh, they're kind of bored. Maybe I should, skip the last technique and go into training or sparring or, drilling or whatever, positional sparring or whatever. That's something that I wish more instructors would, especially when they're droning on, when they're just talking and the students are zoning out. So that's also something I would tell future and current instructors to kind of be wary of.
Yeah. You got to read the room. If you're showing a technique and then you give your students time to practice it, and then you notice that they're not doing it anymore and they're all just sitting there chatting on the mat, not only is that an indication that it's time to wrap it up, but it's also an indication to you as the teacher that you probably could have done a better job because people aren't engaged. So teachers often tend to blame the students for this if they're sitting on the mat chatting, why aren't you paying attention to coach? Well, a lot of the time, part of it is because coach is doing a shit job, right? It is very common for that to happen where coaches will, they'll tell people to practice something and then they'll go wander off the mat and forget and come back 10 minutes later and just leave the class completely unsupervised. That's not good. Again, this is maybe an argument against kind of the classical way of teaching where you give people just a few techniques and you tell them to copy you. That's just not a very engaging way to train. And so that's where I think a lot of more modern methods like gamified approaches have maybe a bit of an edge, is because done right, they can be a lot more fun. They give people a lot more autonomy to kind of figure out how to do things that they want. Because admittedly, look, if you're just drilling dead repetitions, it gets real boring, especially because you know that those dead repetitions ain't going to work in a real fight. So I think that part of the coach's game design and how they structure the class should be around giving people agency, keeping them engaged, and making sure that they understand that what they're developing is a useful skill. If the student doesn't feel like what they're learning is useful, nothing else really matters.
This is the competitor in me, but also you have to embrace those boring, not for teachers, guys, but for competitors. You have to embrace those boring moments because it's not always going to be fun. There's going to be times where, you're just going to have to bear through it. You're just going to have to brute force it. And I think at a certain point, you just kind of embrace it. Like you embrace that. But for my casual people, they're going to hate that. And that's something that editing has helped me, editing YouTube and whatever other videos, because one of the biggest metrics is like the average view duration. How long are you keeping that person's attention, your audience's attention? And so editing has helped me just because, to keep someone's attention on YouTube, you have Mr. Beast and you got B Team and Flow Grappling and whoever else, usually more exciting than most of us. It's hard to keep someone's attention. And so it's a very valuable thing. And so when you're teaching, it's a very valuable thing, your students' attention, and they're taking time out of their day to come to your class. So I also try to keep that in mind, try to keep the class interesting, try to break it up, try to, ask them questions, keep it fun, playful. And overall, you want them feeling satisfied after the class. You want them to feel like, man, I'm glad I came today. So that's also something I always try to keep in mind.
Right. Now, I want to just double click on something that you said there. You talked about how if you're a serious competitor, you might need to lean into the kind of boring, mundane stuff. And I would ask, is that really a thing that a competitor needs to worry about? I mean, if you are a serious competitor, I would assume that you would find that stuff a lot more interesting. When I think of something that's boring, it's usually when I know that what I'm doing is not making me better. And usually that's a reflection on the coach, right? So let me give you an example. Let's say that I come in and the coach decides that what we're going to do is some weird, obscure gi-based sweep, and we're going to just do tons and tons and tons of repetitions on it against a non-resisting opponent. I know a few things right there out of the gate. I know that number one, this particular move is very context dependent. And look, I could train for decades and the situation where that move makes sense may never arise. So it might not be a good use of my time to even train it. And number two, if we're just doing drills without having a resisting opponent, I'm not really learning a useful skill. And so in those cases, I would say the boredom is an implication that the coach maybe could be doing a better job. If I'm sitting there and I'm actually getting better at something and it's engaging, I could do it for hours and it won't bother me, right? Because I can tell that it's important. I buy into the importance of it and I can feel the progression. So what did you mean when you were talking about when you're a competitor, you have to lean into that? Because I'm assuming that, look, if you're a competitor, you're still not going to benefit that much from, doing 10,000 dead drills against someone. At some point, you're going to want to start to add in the resistance. And to me, if there's resistance, fundamentally, it's not boring because there's movement and there's stuff going on.
I feel like there's a disconnect between jiu-jitsu and wrestling. So in wrestling, it's like they kind of embrace, obviously they do more play too, but they'll also embrace more drilling, more, I don't know how you consider it, but like more brute force drilling, I'm going to do these repetitions. I think especially as a competitor, there's going to be times where you do things you don't want to do. For instance, yesterday I was doing some wrestling. I didn't want to do it, but my good friend Jeff wanted to do some wrestling drills, and I saw value in it, but at the time I just really didn't want to do it. But, even while I was kind of hating it, I knew that it was, one, it was going to help my partner, and then two, there was value in it. I just, at the moment, I didn't want to do it, but I knew that it would, maybe pay off in the future. Maybe I would figure something out, or just doing the repetitions would help me, click with some other move. But it's kind of hard to put in words. But, a lot of times when I'm feeling bored, usually it's on me. Maybe there's a hitting detail in the move. That happened to me recently. I was visiting a school and we were doing a move and I was like, oh my God, I got to do this move. But the more I kind of drilled the move, I kind of saw its true value, like hidden. I'm not expecting casual people to kind of pick up on that, but I feel like you can learn from anybody, and even things you don't want to do or you don't see value in immediately, there might be value hidden in doing the repetitions. It's, it doesn't always come. I feel like people always want a quick understanding and for the move to be, to work or to have perfect understanding. But sometimes you need to put that time in, and even if it's something that doesn't work, at least you put that time in to figure out, oh, this move, okay, the move not going to work no matter how hard I try. But I just feel like you can learn from, or at least myself, I can learn from anybody and any training method, teaching method. There's something you can pull from there. And it's not always exciting though.
That is a good point. There's definitely been a trend in Jiu-Jitsu over the last while to focus on teaching the perfect class, where you're using all of the most cutting edge methods, and everything that you as the instructor do is perfect and microanalyzed and completely managed and planned out. But it is possible to over-optimize. And I think in Jiu-Jitsu, a lot of us fall into this trap because it sure feels like people who get into Jiu-Jitsu tend to be more on the analytical side. And it's possible to get so stuck in your own head that you're so focused on trying to optimize and make things perfect that you're not actually just putting in the work. And I mean, look, you're better off putting in hours and hours of suboptimal training versus spending all day trying to design the perfect training system that you never use, right? At the end of the day, the person who's consistent and puts in the time is going to be better, even if their training is not necessarily optimal. I mean, the best of both worlds is you've got the best training methods and you've got the time that you put in, but you're unlikely to get there unless you've put in the time to experiment and to play around and try new things. So, and I agree with you too, that sometimes, when you're bored doing something or you're looking at a technique and you're thinking, this just isn't for me, it's still worth learning it anyway, because if nothing else, it will give you perspective. And the one thing about jiu-jitsu is, regardless of whatever technique or strategy you're using, even if it's not something that you intend to use, you need to make sure that you can prevent your opponent from using it against you. So you still got to learn it, right? I mean, I might never play fancy lapel stuff in my entire life, but I still have to at least know enough about it to play it in reverse, right? And not let it happen against me, because I can't do the type of jiu-jitsu I want to do unless I can deny you the ability to do the type of jiu-jitsu you want to do. And so it's always worth learning the stuff, because even if it doesn't work for you, well, it might work for someone else, and you got to make sure that they can't do it to you.
I just want to add that, I've been around for a long time. So there's been years where, I was training suboptimally, or, I didn't feel like I was making progress. But when I look back, it's like, I don't know if maybe I would be better if I had trained smarter or, had better coaching, but I don't know if I would be in the same place I am now. Like, I feel like even if I wasn't training the best, or I didn't have the best training coach or methods or whatever, I mean, I had some good coaching, but that doesn't mean they could teach the best always. But I feel like everything was still valuable. I think you kind of touched on that, like, just being on the mat and, learning, and it was worth something. That's what I want to say. It was worth something. And also I want to say how you treat people is also important for instructors. So don't let the power go to your heads. Remember that we're all human, even if their person's a white belt, they deserve respect too. So don't go too hard on them.
Yeah. The whole belt thing, I'm generally not a huge fan of, because people put so much thought and so much weight onto the importance of the belt, but it really is just a piece of fabric. I mean, I know it's easy to say that when you've got a black belt, but look, it's not like getting a doctorate. It's not some heavily regulated thing. Basically, all a black belt means is you hung around long enough that some person thought, hey, I should give this person a black belt, right? It's not like getting a PhD. The bar is a bit lower. But in jiu-jitsu, we tend to put a tremendous amount of respect on that belt. And it very much can activate an authority bias, both when you're looking at someone who's wearing a black belt, but even more dangerously when you, as the person wearing that belt, are interacting with your class, you run the risk of coming in from a position of an ivory tower where you're the professor, right? And that can be detrimental to your teaching style. I think, like we talked about earlier, one of the best ways to get better at jiu-jitsu is to start teaching. Because when you have to teach something, it forces you to clarify and simplify and organize your thoughts in a way that someone else can understand what you're talking about. A lot of jiu-jitsu is very much about understanding our own bodies. And if you've done something long enough, you might be able to do a technique in your sleep. In fact, you probably should be able to, because that's kind of a sign that you really know what you're doing. But if you want to communicate that to someone else, you have to question some of the things that you've been doing maybe for years without even realizing it. So teaching is a very powerful tool for learning, because you have to, in your head, unravel and question everything you've learned. And you might discover as you're doing this that a lot of the things you're doing actually don't make sense, or maybe there's a better way. I think we've all had this where we're teaching people our A game or something we really like. And then someone asks a question about, well, why are you doing this? And then you have to stop and think about it, and you realize, I don't know why I'm doing that. I've just always done it, right? And it always worked. And no one stopped me. So I just kind of did it without thinking about it. So the power of teaching is that it forces you to question all of these assumptions you may have made and built up over the years. So it's not just about benefiting your students. It benefits you as the instructor as well.
I think when you're teaching, you should, something I try to do, you should always lead with logic. So everything should make sense. And in your case, when someone's asking you, oh, what happens if they do this? Even if you don't have an answer, you should be able to reason maybe the next step, or just be honest. Like, hey, I haven't thought about that. Let me figure it out. That's something I would learn from John Thomas as well. Just like, oh, you don't have an answer? Well, let's put you in a position and we'll figure it out. We'll kind of problem solve. Yeah. So I think just always leading with logic, and just whatever your understanding is, there's probably going to be some value in it. So I don't want to say people have imposter syndrome, but, everybody, I think, has something to offer. So even the white belt, even the blue belt, even the purple and brown belt, they have something to offer. I'm not saying they should be teaching you, but they have something that can probably help you, or maybe a different outlook, or even just a suggestion.
Yeah. And I would say that even if that white belt doesn't actually know much about jiu-jitsu, there's still a lot that you, as a more senior practitioner, can learn from them anyway, because white belts will often do things that maybe they're not the best jiu-jitsu, but they're something that a human being would intuitively do in that situation. And sometimes those intuitive things are different from what you're going to get when you train against an experienced person. I'll give you an example. I was training with a really big, strong white belt last night, and I was doing some what Rob Bernacki calls fuck your jiu-jitsu, where basically you put yourself in a really bad position to see how you can handle it and how you can get out. I love doing this with more junior belts, because it means that they've got a shot at winning as well, and it means that I'm going to get to learn and work on stuff that I wouldn't get to do if I just tried to just smash them, right? I put this white belt behind me and had him start in a fully locked in rear naked choke. And I realized while he was doing it that a lot of the things that I do to defend a rear naked, they work exceptionally well against an experienced person who's doing the rear naked correctly. But if the white belt does the wrong thing, which is kind of the intuitive thing, and that is basically where they just like try to pull your head off your body, it puts my body in a position where I can't actually do my black belt level escape the way that I want to. And I realized I actually have to be mindful of the situation. I never thought about it. I am used to the person behind me trying to get that elbow under my chin, and they're trying to, coil up around me, and they're trying to get in tight and keep that chest to back connection. And my escapes work beautifully there. But if I've got a white belt who just wants to pull backwards on my neck, I can't quite get my body into the position I want. So, the white belt didn't know he was teaching me a lesson, but he absolutely was. So I think that that's an important thing to understand, is you can learn from people even if they don't know what they're teaching you, because just by the fact that they're different and they do different things, that diversity, it challenges you and it helps you learn things and think and solve your own problems that you might not have found otherwise if you were just training with other black belts.
No, that's true. I would be careful with those guys, but yeah, you're going to learn the lesson the easy way or the hard way.
Oh, I absolutely regret it. I think I got an inch taller from just someone pulling on the back of my head. I was wondering, like, I may have learned a lesson here, but am I going to have a stroke from this? But anyway, all of this aside, something else I wanted to ask you, Alec, is a really prominent YouTuber. When people talk about jiu-jitsu instruction, they think of the person at the front of the room who's running the class. I think that's a very narrow-minded idea of what it means to be a teacher. I think if you are making instructional content or YouTube content or even Instagram content, I think you absolutely qualify as a teacher. If you're making material and people are learning jiu-jitsu from you, you're a teacher. And I'm sure that you have had this mindset shift at some point in your journey, as I know I have. The more I do this podcast, the more I realize there are people who come to me as a teacher, and the relationship they will have with me is different from the relationship they'll have with their instructor in the class. So maybe I do things a bit different, but I can still really help people through this method. And I'm sure you've got a ton of messages from people who have said the same thing about your content. How has that informed your teaching method? I mean, have you had to make any pivots in how you teach or explain things when you're doing YouTube content versus, say, the way that you would just run a class in person?
That's actually kind of funny because when I first started making content, I would just film the classes and I would just have mid-class, all right, put the camera on me, white belt. That's who I usually get to film. I think for me, it just made me more efficient at getting my message across and, just almost like stage presence. I think that's the right term. And just, cutting out all the fluff and getting right to the point. It also, whenever I would film too, usually I had been teaching the move already for a while. So I had not like a script, but I knew exactly what to say, when to say it. So I think teaching or actually, doing content made me a better instructor because I was more interacting with the students online, on Reddit, on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram. I think it just gives you more feedback because, when you're in the comment section, the people aren't there with you. So they're going to be like, oh, this is great technique. Oh, this was terrible. You should stop teaching. So I think sometimes the feedback was kind of hard to take, but overall, it was beneficial. I learned a lot of lessons, especially just how to talk to the camera, which is the same as talking to a student, and just how to be more relaxed. A lot of instructors get nervous, but once you've been filming yourself for, all these things, you can it's almost like acting. You go into like a role, like you go into your jiu-jitsu instructor role. So that's kind of what I learned. I'm trying to think what else I learned. Just how to be funny. I think I also learned how to be funny, how to tell jokes just from filming these videos.
Well, those are important skill sets to have. And again, this comes back to things that you won't learn about being a teacher when you're doing jiu-jitsu. Your student's journey in jiu-jitsu is usually all just about getting better at jiu-jitsu. But then when you become a teacher, now you're expected to have all of these skills like conflict resolution and how to build rapport and be engaging and how to read the room and understand if your messaging is getting across and how to streamline your message for the audience in person. All of this stuff is stuff you're going to have to discover on the job unless you bring these skills in from other walks of your life. And that's actually another amazing reason why people should talk to white belts more and get them more involved. Preet Mikkelsen was talking about this, where he said at some point, he realized all of these white belts in his class, they're like doctors and lawyers and engineers and teachers. And they might not know anything about jiu-jitsu, but in terms of relevant teaching skills, they dwarf the vast majority of jiu-jitsu instructors. So if you've got actual professors in your class who have real teaching experience, why not tap them for that, right? Why not get them involved? They may not be able to solve for the jiu-jitsu side of things yet, but they definitely have value. And that I think is such an important thing to understand. I mean, if you are teaching a class, yes, you want to know the jobs that the people in your class have because you can use that sometimes. I mean, I've got we've talked on the podcast so much about things like ecological dynamics, but look, most of the people who talk about and love eco in jiu-jitsu have minimal educational experience, right? They're basically just people who have listened to a few podcasts or maybe read a few articles on it. And, they're not trained in this area. Whereas you talk to a lot of, just actual teachers. One of the people in my gym, he's a purple belt in jiu-jitsu, but he is actually a teacher. And as we talked about earlier, that requires a significant amount of education. I love talking to people like this because they've actually gone to school for this stuff. I can ask him about something like ecological dynamics, And he can give me a more qualitative answer than I'm going to get from someone who got all of their knowledge just from playing with it in the gym and maybe reading a few articles, right? So those people are tremendously valuable. And I think if the only way that you measure someone's teaching ability is by their belt collar, you're losing out on a lot of great opportunities to build up other coaches in your gym and to also learn from other people's life experiences.
Yeah, there is no best teaching style. I think even in the field of education, there is no like, oh, this is the only way to teach. You know, every country and every school has their methods. But yeah.
Yeah, one thing that I've observed, I mean, we kind of break a lot of the rules by doing this podcast the way that we do. I've learned to try to read the medium in the way that I'm communicating to people. I mean, if you're looking at people who are really successful on Instagram, for example, I would shout out Dom Bell and Heather Morgan. They do amazing content, and I always have so much respect for the way that they do it because like they will integrate in, hand cues and visuals. So it's not just some guy talking. I mean, I can be scrolling through a feed, and if I see Dom pop up, right, he will be doing things with his hands such that I can understand his message in a split second and decide if I want to pause or if I want to keep scrolling. Very, very thoughtful man and woman in the case of Heather when it comes to how they structure their content. But for you, that exact approach isn't going to work the same way because YouTube content is going to be a little bit longer. For me, what I have found is I break a lot of the rules with the podcast here. I let people ramble on. I like it when they do because people, when they want to listen to podcast audio, they want an organic conversation. And so a big part of what we try to do is we try to package educational material inside the context of a natural, organic conversation. I would never do it this way if I was making Instagram videos. I'd be trying to cram everything into 30 seconds, right? So so you have to know the medium. You have to also try teaching people things with different takes, right? Sometimes people won't really get something until they do it themselves. Or sometimes people won't really get something until you sit them down and explain to them why they're doing it. And that can vary depending on the situation. So yeah, I think being cognizant of different ways to teach stuff can be a very useful skill as a coach or a content creator.
Yeah, I think of when I'm teaching, I try to hit like different styles of learning. So, some people are auditory, so I'll describe in detail the steps I'm taking. Some people are more visual. I'll show what I'm doing. Some people are more tactile. I'll grab them and demonstrate through their body how to do the move. So, there's room for everybody to teach. And with online, YouTube in particular, everybody can teach. And we're starting to see that a little bit more often. And there's so many really great instructors. They're probably not super popular to everybody, but there's a lot of great content out there. If someone, is in need of help or they want to learn certain techniques, there's no shortage of great instructors out there. You mentioned Don Bell, John Thomas, big one. John Carlo's pretty good. I think Marcus Tinoco's on there. Jozef, you don't really post. Tariq is really good. Man, so many good people. I feel like they don't really get shined too much for their coaching or teaching ability, but so many great instructors out there.
Yeah, well, tell you what, I'll try to put some of those people in the show notes here to just give people some recommendations about who to follow, because I agree with you. One of the main challenges in jiu-jitsu is just who do I want to actually follow to get my content? There's so much. But one thing that I would expand on a bit, you talked about the idea of learning styles. This is kind of an old school concept that had been floating around for a long time, this idea that some people are visual learners or auditory learners. My understanding is that was actually pretty thoroughly debunked. So apparently they've done, and again, I run the risk of putting my foot in my mouth here, so sorry to the listeners if I'm wrong, but my understanding is this has been studied and it's not as universal as Bob learns through audio, Emily learns through tactile. It's not that simple. But that said, I think that there is benefit in attacking different messages and different lessons through different mediums. Because I've certainly had this sometimes where I try to do a move over and over and over again physically, and it just doesn't work. But then if I sit down and watch someone do it, it really helps. Or if someone sits and spends 5 minutes explaining to me why we do it that way, it fills in a missing gap that I just didn't know was there. So this is something I like to do as an instructor. It's hard to do through this podcast, of course, but if I really want someone to learn something, I'm going to try to hit them with that lesson in a bunch of different ways. I'm going to try to give them something visual. I'm going to try to give them hands-on experience. I'm going to try to explain it to them. I'm going to encourage them to note take and to think through their own thoughts. And I've personally found that giving them a bunch of different modalities like that, where they can try to learn in a bunch of different ways, that can be super helpful, because it is very hard sometimes to learn a technique just by drilling. Sometimes you need a person to sit down and explain it to you.
And I kind of gone down a rabbit hole in this. Like, I remember I was trying to maybe show a knee cut or something, and the guy just wasn't getting it. So I was like, I got my camera out and I did like the slow-mo. I was like, all right, do it. So, worst case, you just film the person doing it. And you're like, all right, here, fix that.
That is such a powerful method. Like that's the whole basis of a lot of our premium services is we take people's video clips and we break it down. And I am just consistently amazed that more people don't do this. If you take a 2-minute clip of yourself rolling and you actually watch it and microanalyze it, you're probably going to learn more from that than if you spent hours studying instructionals. Just because if you see how something applies directly to you, it's one thing to see Gordon Ryan doing a move and to think to yourself, I should copy that. It's another thing to see yourself doing it and thinking to yourself, I should not have put my leg there, right? It's easier, I find, for messages to stick when you see yourself doing something and then someone is telling you what you did right or wrong.
Yeah, I mean, watching the video is the best proof. I do want to say that, I've filmed a lot of instructionals and stuff like that. I think for me, if you guys go to my YouTube, it's been less instructionals. That's something I wanted to talk about too. It's been less technique and more concepts and more stories. I think for me, that's been the best way to hide the lessons that I want to teach people. Because, before it'll be me, okay, guys, talking to the camera. But I think there's no limit to how we can convey information, through podcasts, through stories, through breakdowns. So it's an exciting time to be alive because we have, so many resources and technology that, there's no reason for people not to be better at jiu-jitsu now.
Yeah. I mean, it is very much a time of abundance when it comes to jiu-jitsu. I, like you probably, when I was coming up, there was just not that much info out there. You would maybe hear rumors of some cool new technique that Marcelo was using, but you couldn't find any instructional content about it anywhere. And the problem very much now is the opposite, where the challenging part is finding out where to start or what to study. How do you pick a needle out of this massive haystack? But you know what? I've got a place I would suggest people go, and that's your YouTube channel. Why don't we plug it, man? Talk about your YouTube channel and what kind of content people can expect on there.
Yeah, my YouTube channel, it's evolved. That's something someone told me a long time ago, like, it's like you're documenting your journey. So I've had my YouTube, I think I've been posting on there since really posting on there since 2017. And I think I've tried just about every type of content out there. But over the last few months, I've kind of found something that I'm passionate about and that seems to be doing well. So I've been covering more so other athletes and kind of their stories, their process, and how they got so good and how they've changed jiu-jitsu. And I don't know, I'm sure it's been done before, but maybe not in our field. So yeah, if they're looking to learn jiu-jitsu without being bored, they want to be entertained through jiu-jitsu, I think I have a good YouTube channel to check out.
Amazing. Well, I'll put a link in the show notes. What other stuff do we want to send people to? I'm presuming your Instagram's a good follow as well, but any other instructionals that you want to plug or places on social where people should go to find you?
Yeah, I have my Instagram, my website, Alec Baulding. Everything's Alec Baulding, so pretty easy. As far as instructionals, I have a really good one on BJJ Fanatics called Keeping the Guard for no-gi. Goes over foundational guard retention skills. At the time, wasn't, as much content on there about that. And then on my website, I have my own instructional. It's called The Short Guy Guard, which is whenever I think about it, it's kind of funny. I noticed that there wasn't that many short guard player instructionals, so I was like, man, I'm going to make one. So that's how that came about.
Well, I appreciate that because jiu-jitsu is full of techniques for these giant skinny bean poles. And here I am built like a hobbit and there isn't that much instructional content out there for me. So I always appreciate short guy content.
Like everybody's like, how's everybody like 6'8"? Like,
fuck, I don't know, man. I don't get it. Like, I'm not the tallest guy in the world, but I'm not like aggressively short. But it feels like all of these people making an instructionals are all like 6'3", and they, assume that you've got these giant legs. I keep trying to explain to these people, like, I can't triangle choke like 90% of the population because I got these tiny stubby legs. And people always say, well, it's just because you're not cutting the angle. But no, you don't understand.
There is no angle. The angle's gone.
Physically, I cannot close my legs around your triangle. It cannot be done. So I always appreciate people taking that into account and building material for the rest of us here.
I think also as an instructor, just representation is important. So sometimes people just click with certain people and there's no like, we can't really control that or anything. You know, some people are just more charismatic, you know, they get more attention or they have an accent or they fit some kind of role. So if you're out there and you're struggling to teach, I'm not saying it's not for you, but you just maybe you haven't found your audience or you just got to do some tweaking. And that's what I've done, you know, just kind of keep adjusting and adapting over the years. And like I said, I've been posting on YouTube since 2017. It's taken me until 2023 to actually like feel like, oh, I kind of got this down. Or almost got it down. I think I'm doing okay now. But it took a lot of trial and error, a lot of failure, a lot of just, you know, a lot of comments on Reddit, guys. Woo.
Oh boy. I can't deal with those people. But I just retreat to my private Discord where people are much nicer to me. I found out on Reddit, it's just people they don't want to get better at jiu-jitsu. It feels like they just want to argue and spill the tea and follow drama sometimes.
It wasn't always that bad. You know, I was on there until they kind of ran Mikey off of there. And I was like, oh my God. I was like, oh Jesus.
That's the thing. I mean, if you managed to run Mikey Musumeci out of town, you fucked up somewhere. You did something seriously wrong. But anyway, I will put links to all of your stuff in the show notes. So again, like I said, if it isn't clear enough, I definitely recommend giving Alec a follow, especially his YouTube channel. So yeah, thanks for all you do, Alec. And thanks for that amazing video piece you did on us and Jozef. I'll also put that in the show notes. I'll also throw a link to our stuff. Everything we make lives at bjjmentalmodels.com. That's where you can find the podcast. You can listen to it directly from there or on pretty much any major podcast app that you like. You can also sign up for our awesome free newsletter there. Again, so far, everything we've talked about there, that's all free content. You can grab it now. No ads, no nothing. That's never been our thing. But if you want to go to the next level with us, that's where our premium service helps out. So join premium and you get a massive library of audio courses on philosophy, strategy, tactics for jiu-jitsu, mindset, featuring some of the best minds in the sport. We've got some amazing courses on there. I actually have one. I can't quite announce it yet, but I think it's going to be a barn burner when it comes out. I'm just finalizing who's going to be involved in it. We're always trying to launch new stuff there. And if you join premium, you get all of our courses plus any course we make in the future. Perhaps most interestingly, you also get rolling reviews. So like I said, if you don't believe me that having your video reviewed can make that much of a difference, tell you what, go to bjjmentalmodels.com, sign up for premium. You get a 7-day free trial. All I ask, send me one video, just a 2-minute clip of you rolling. Doesn't have to be fancy. You will be blown away by what you get in return. And like I said, it's a free trial, so cancel it if you disagree with me. You won't pay a cent. Definitely recommend checking it out. Again, all of that is on bjjmentalmodels.com, and I'll put a link in the show notes. But Alec, thanks a lot, man. I really appreciate the time. Been looking forward to having you on, and I'm always interested in talking about the student to teacher transition here. So thanks for sharing your knowledge.
No problem.
And thanks to the listeners too. Greatly appreciate you as well, and we'll talk to you next week. Take care.